I never thought one quiet neighborhood could burn my whole life down, but here I am, years later, still tasting smoke every time I talk about it, still feeling that strange mix of anger and calm when I remember the woman who thought she owned the world just because she held a clipboard and a title in an HOA. If you had told me back then that a simple neighborhood rule enforcer would end up shaping my life more than any storm, any accident, I probably would have laughed and brushed it off. But life has a way of teaching you lessons you never asked for, and it rarely asks if you're ready to learn them. When I first moved into Maple Ridge, I honestly wanted peace. I had just bought a modest little property on the edge of town, a place where I could raise some livestock, grow a few crops, and just breathe for the first time in years. My name is Miles, and I am not the dramatic type. I am not a troublemaker. I do not enjoy conflict. I like mornings that smell like hay and coffee, afternoons where you're too tired to be stressed, and nights where the loudest thing is crickets. I thought that was exactly what I had signed up for, until I met Claire. Now, Claire was not loud at first glance. She was that polished, overly calm kind of person, the type whose smile feels rehearsed, whose kindness sounds like it has a contract attached to it. She was president of the HOA, and everyone in town said the same sentence in slightly different ways. Just stay on her good side. But I have learned something about people like her, people who live on power like others live on oxygen. There is no good side to stay on. There is only temporary tolerance until the moment you do something they do not like, and then suddenly you are the story they tell to feed their need for control. For the first 6 months, I stayed quiet. I kept my fences clean, my driveway clear, my grass trimmed military short. I played along. I went to meetings, nodded, smiled, signed whatever form they slid in front of me as long as it did not violate common sense. But Claire noticed me anyway, and I could never figure out if I annoyed her because I refused to be intimidated or simply because I did not give her the reaction she wanted. Power-hungry people do not actually want obedience. They want submission. And I never learned how to kneel properly. She fined people for ridiculous things. Mailboxes too cheerful. Curtains not community appropriate. One guy got written up because his wind chimes were emotionally disruptive. It was absurd, and you would laugh if you were not the one living inside it. So when she started targeting me, I did what I do best. I stayed calm, and I documented everything. Every letter, every weird comment, every time she stood on my property line pretending to inspect something invisible. And just when I thought her obsession with control was the worst thing that could happen, life twisted the knife. Her cat wandered onto my property one afternoon and picked a fight with my dog, Rusty. Rusty had grown up on farms his whole life, sweet but protective, and in a blur of instinct and confusion, it happened. The cat did not make it. I still remember standing there afterwards, holding Rusty by the collar while he shook and whined like he knew he had crossed some sacred line, and I felt sick. Not defensive, not angry, just sick, because an animal dying like that never feels justified. It only feels like loss. When Claire came over later that day, she did not scream. She did not threaten. She smiled. That slow, syrupy smile that feels like it sticks to your ribs. She told me things like these happen, that fate is cruel, that she was not angry. And I wanted to believe her, because guilt makes you desperate for forgiveness. I apologized. I offered to pay for anything she needed. She waved it off, said I should just focus on keeping my farm running smoothly. She even patted Rusty once through the fence, and I remember thinking maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe there was a human heart behind all that control after all. Turns out I was wrong. Dead wrong. After that day, everything became too quiet. No fines. No passive-aggressive emails. No strange HOA visits. Just silence. And silence can be comforting if you trust it, but with Claire it felt like a hallway with the lights off, like something was standing there waiting for me to take the next step. She started showing up again, slowly, casually, dropping off cookies, asking innocent questions about my generators, my fuel storage, my livestock counts, laughing in that soft way when she mentioned fire insurance response time, like it was a joke we were both supposed to appreciate. I told myself not to overthink it, told myself grief makes people weird, told myself I was being paranoid. And while I was convincing myself I was crazy, she was quietly setting the stage. And this is where everything shifts, where the calm turns into smoke, where patience turns into a weapon instead of a virtue. But to keep the story flowing right, I will continue in the next part. So let me pick this up right where I left it, because from that quiet, uneasy stretch forward, everything started sliding downhill in ways that felt subtle at first, like a slow leak you do not notice until the floor caved beneath you. After Claire decided to become this strangely calm, overly kind version of herself, I tried to match her tone. I tried to be polite, neighborly, maybe even a bit softer than usual, because guilt still lived in my chest like a stubborn tenant that refused to move out. She would wave across the road with that pleasant little smile, linger just a bit too long when she dropped off baked goods, and always steer conversation toward my land. You ever have someone ask you questions that sound friendly, but the way they ask them makes your skin crawl? That was every conversation with her. She would tilt her head a little and say, "So how many animals are you keeping now, Miles? That must be hard to manage. I would be so worried about accidents." Or she would laugh lightly and mention how these old barns catch heat so quickly, like she had read it off a trivia card but wanted me to memorize it. Once, she stood there leaning against my fence, staring straight at Rusty in his reinforced cage, and asked almost casually, "Do those things hold up well in extreme conditions like heat?" Then she giggled, like she had said something cute instead of something that should have been a warning flare. But see, when you want to believe the best in people, you start explaining away what should scare you. I told myself she was just grieving in a strange, controlling way. I told myself maybe she needed to feel powerful again. So she poked around my property as some kind of emotional bandage. I doubled my security checks, sure, but I also kept convincing myself nothing serious would happen. People like Claire love theater, I thought, not consequences. Meanwhile, life kept going. I worked sunup to sundown. I fixed fences, fed livestock, checked irrigation lines, and every night I locked Rusty gently in his enclosure near the barn. He hated it. He would whine quietly, eyes following me the entire way back to the house, like he did not quite understand why I was punishing him for something he did not mean to do. I kept telling him this was temporary, that I just needed to prove to everyone, maybe mostly to myself, that I could keep everything safe. Funny thing about trying to prove safety, though, it has a way of turning into a trap when the person watching you is the one planning danger. The weird little incidents started stacking up. One morning, I found my fuel shed latch partially undone. I blamed myself and locked it tighter. A week later, a city contractor wandered onto my land claiming he was checking property lines for HOA compliance. No work order, no paperwork, just a confident vest and a measuring wheel. He disappeared fast when I started recording him. A neighbor mentioned seeing Claire talking to some stranger near my driveway, laughing like old friends. I brushed it off again. I wish I hadn't. The day everything broke looked deceptively normal. Clear sky, warm air. One of those mornings where life feels routine, predictable, almost boring. I left early to grab supplies in town, feed, fencing materials, a few spare parts. Halfway back home, I saw it, a towering column of black, smoke rising exactly where my world lived. There's a unique kind of fear that does not scream. It compresses. It squeezes your lungs into silence before your brain even lets you panic. That was me, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white while my mind just kept whispering no, no, no. Sirens were already echoing somewhere far off when I turned down my road, but fire does not care about sirens. Fire does not negotiate. By the time I reached my property line, the world I had built looked like it was being swallowed alive. The heat hit first, then the sound, the roar of flames, the frantic screams of animals in pure terror, the metallic popping of things breaking under heat. I jumped out of the truck and ran, shouting, choking, grabbing anything that looked like it could carry water, like instinct might somehow outrun physics. That is when I saw her. Claire stood near my fuel shed like she was posing for a villain reveal in some movie. One hand holding an empty gas can, the other hanging loose, head slightly tilted, lips curved into that calm, poisonous smile. There was no panic on her face, no shock, no regret, just satisfaction. Our eyes locked through the heat shimmer, and for a split second the whole world went silent, like everything paused just to let that moment burn itself permanently into my memory. "You finally paying attention now, Miles?" she called out over the sound of fire, voice steady like she was giving a presentation instead of watching living beings die. "Actions have weight. Maybe next time you think before you take something precious from someone." I wanted to charge at her, scream, do something reckless, but another sound shattered everything inside me. The scream Rusty made. It was raw, desperate, full of trust and terror all at once, and it came from the direction of his cage. I turned and saw it engulfed in flames, the metal bars glowing red, the air around it distorting. My legs moved before thought did. I ran through heat I could barely survive, tried ripping at the door with hands that blistered instantly, tried yelling his name like my voice could put the fire out. He looked at me for one horrible second, eyes bright and terrified and still trusting that I would fix this, because I always did, and then the lock glowed, the structure buckled, and everything inside went silent. Something inside me broke in a way that does not make sound. I dropped, not dramatically, not heroically, just collapsed into ash and heat and grief, so heavy it pinned me to the ground. I remember crying without realizing it, coughing and choking and still reaching even when there was nothing left to reach for. By the time firefighters flooded the place with water and shouted commands I could barely hear, Claire was gone. Just vanished, like she had walked out of a theater after enjoying the show. But cameras never forget, and grief eventually sharpens into something colder, steadier, more dangerous than rage. My system had recorded every step she took, every flicker of hesitation she did not have. And as the smoke thinned and officers began asking questions, something inside me shifted from pain to clarity. This was not just cruelty. This was control. This was punishment. This was someone who believed she could play God because nobody had ever forced her to face consequences. And standing in those ruins, I realized I was done trying to stay quiet, done trying to avoid conflict, done hoping reason could tame someone who worshiped power. That night, I backed up everything. Footage, logs, photos, minutes. I handed evidence over with a strange calm, like a man who had finally stopped drowning and just let the current carry him. They launched an investigation immediately. Traffic cameras, fuel station receipts, witness statements, and piece by piece, they stitched her arrogance into a net she could not escape. But justice always comes in waves, and the first one had only just begun to rise. So if you're still with me, still breathing with me through this story, tell me when you're ready, because part 3 is where consequences finally come home, where the fire that destroyed my world turns into the fire that burns her illusion of power to the ground. All right, let's bring this home, because what came next wasn't loud like the fire. It wasn't dramatic in the same burning, screaming way. It was quieter, slower, colder. It was the kind of justice that doesn't rush, the kind that takes its time, sharpens its edges, and waits until arrogance stops struggling before it clamps down. The investigation moved faster than I expected, probably because there was so much to work with. My cameras didn't just catch Claire walking into my property with gasoline. They caught the way she looked around, the exact path she took, the intentional pauses, the deliberate ignition at multiple points. It wasn't rage. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was planned. It was clean. It was terrifyingly calm. The detectives synced my footage with traffic cameras from town. They matched her car, leaving at specific times. They pulled receipts showing she bought fuel that morning. They tracked her phone location data hovering around my land like a storm cloud waiting to break. And when they finally knocked on her door, she apparently answered with that same composed smile she always wore, like she truly believed she was still untouchable, like the system she had spent years pretending to represent would somehow bend for her, because it always had. It didn't. Court wasn't dramatic for me. I didn't go there wanting to feel powerful. I went because I needed to sit in a room where the truth had to be spoken without charm or control or HOA titles disguising it. I sat there and listened while prosecutors listed charges like stepping stones across a river she couldn't come back from, aggravated arson, destruction of agricultural property, felony animal cruelty, reckless endangerment, environmental damage. They played the footage. They showed the timeline. It didn't need speeches. They just needed facts. And for the first time since I'd known her, Claire didn't look confident. She didn't smile. She didn't correct anyone. She just sat there, smaller somehow, like the title she'd built her identity around had been peeled off, and all that was left was a person stunned that consequences were actually real. When the sentence finally came, it landed heavy. Years in prison. No quick parole. Massive restitution. Not theoretical numbers, but real, tangible amounts that meant homes, savings, comfort, and pride were gone. Her house was seized. Accounts drained. She was barred from anything that looked like authority for the rest of her life. The HOA that had once bowed to her collapsed under lawsuits and investigations, like her power had always been the glue holding a rotten structure together. People asked me if I felt satisfied, if justice made it better. And I'll be honest with you, justice doesn't heal. It stabilizes. It doesn't give you back what you lost. It simply stops the bleeding long enough for you to learn how to live with the scars. I rebuilt slowly. Friends helped. Neighbors who once whispered started standing with me instead. The land eventually smelled like earth again instead of smoke. But some things don't return. Rusty doesn't come back. The animals don't come back. The nights where I slept without replaying it don't magically appear. What comes back instead is strength you never planned to grow, patience you didn't ask for, and a clarity about people and power that you carry like armor. Every once in a while, I think about Claire. Not out of obsession, not out of hate, but out of curiosity. I wonder when the moment hit her. Was it when a judge spoke? When a cell door closed? When she realized no clipboard, no rule book, no fake smile could rewrite reality anymore? Power only works when people believe you have it, and once that belief evaporates, you're just a person like everyone else. Only now you have to face what you've done without the comfort of pretending you're above it. And here's the strange part. The part people don't always like when I say it out loud. I don't wish her endless misery. I don't wish her a lifetime of pain. I wish her understanding. I wish her the kind of clarity that comes from finally realizing your actions are not the center of the universe, that other people's lives are not collateral for your anger or your grief. Maybe that's too generous. Maybe that's naive. But I've already lived through enough fire. I don't need to keep burning in my mind too. So that's my story. A quiet town. A woman who thought control was a crown. A moment of grief that turned into something monstrous. A fire that destroyed almost everything, and a justice system that for once didn't blink. Now I want to know what you think. Was justice served? Was it enough? Too much? Do you think grief explains anything she did? Or does grief stop matching the moment you hurt others? And what do you think about HOAs, about power structures in small communities? Do they protect people or just hand crowns to the wrong personalities? Drop your thoughts. Argue. Agree. Disagree. I want to hear your side because stories like this live longest in the conversations they spark. And if you've ever had a neighbor like Claire, a community like ours, or a moment where silence turned into disaster, I'm listening.